Atmosphere in the last 48 hours among the troops of preparing themselves, making sure that whatever they take with them, they've got, that they leave nothing behind, that all the kit, the ammunition, the supplies they need, the radio frequencies are all rehearsed and known, so that nothing is left to chance once they do cross the border. And that means, of course, for our colleagues stuck in their armoured cars with the advance force, that they may have to wait a little longer, but I know that the NATO commanders aren't prepared to allow their force to go ahead until they're absolutely confident that everything's completely 100% organised and nothing's left to chance.
Those costs
the same sort of support they hold for the KLA. It might not be the truth, but what it does mean is that plans are now being made for these people to go home, and that's certainly a top priority for both NATO and the refugees.
Have you sort of gained any impression from them of how quickly they think they might be able to go home?
We saw 6 MiG-21s heading out, and then NATO's drones overhead, checking
order this evening, but their departure was put on hold. It seems that twice now NATO has geared up and geared down for entering Kosovo. With the Russians already in Yugoslavia, the alliance has reason to want to hurry. NATO officials came to the border again today for more talks with the Yugoslavs about their retreat. They brought in the maps to discuss exit routes and minefields. NATO said the talks went well, but the Yugoslavs left in a hurry. Within sight of the border, Yugoslav troops were still in position this evening. But earlier we saw Serb civilians leaving their own villages. They didn't want to wait to welcome them.
They are basically moving up to the border area, trying to be within 10 or 15 minutes of being able to cross it. Once the border opens, it will be a mad, like a gold rush, with all the military equipment and hardware coming across the border, pushing into Kosovo. So we have counted at least 30 vehicles, including several British Challenger tanks that were coming up the road here to Blace as darkness falls here in Macedonia. Now, we can see the border from where we're standing right here. If I look over my shoulder, about 500 meters.
It's an armored,
a light tank.
It's a reconnaissance vehicle used by the Household Cavalry Regiment and also by the King's Royal Hussars. They have got their own integral reconnaissance troop.
Fairly fast things, these.
Fast, quite old, 1960s technology. Then we've got the Challenger main battle tank. There you'll see all the extra armour on the front. 70 tons, 120mm gun with a V12 Rolls-Royce engine. Very much a master of the battlefield, very heavily armoured, highly manoeuvrable.
You can see the sort of conditions they're having to travel with. They're very hot, very dusty as well. Is this going to cause problems?
Well, dust is a problem. Don't forget these tanks most of these tanks have been to the Gulf War and back. They know how to deal with dust. This is what we see moving forward here. Well, we've missed them, but now we've got members of 5 Airborne Brigade. Now, what is interesting with these individuals is the amount of equipment they're carrying.
Huge,
absolutely weighed down with it, and that is something. There's a great pride amongst the paras that they carry more kit than just about anybody else in the British Army. And what you see there, apart from water bottles, that they're carrying ammunition, they're carrying anti-tank weapons, they're carrying extra mortar rounds, everything they need to survive, totally unsupported.
And they'll be camping out tonight by their Chinook helicopters with all this kit literally by their side.
They are ready to go. All they've got to do is wake up, put on their helmets, get on their helicopters and go.
We've also had an indication from...
Some of those MiG-21s in a deep underground bunker, despite the fact that it was bombed on both sides, the tunnel under the mountain, and also attacked in the middle to try to destroy what was inside. The Serbs were able to bring those aircraft out and fly them north. But the main story, the Pentagon says, is despite some reports of some last...
guns and mobile radar. The clock is ticking, and they have just 1 day left to remove them. Their president has told them they're heroic victors, and they appear jubilant. As they leave the province under the bridge which marks the border, they cheer, Serbia, Serbia. In part patriotic display, but in large measure relief at the fact that they're no longer in Kosovo, prey to NATO bombers and the snipers of the KLA. They're simply glad to be alive. I'm happy to be going home, he said. We couldn't have fought any better than we did, but we achieved nothing, and the people who are staying behind are scared. We don't trust NATO, this man said. You can't bomb and make peace. NATO is coming soon. Within days, the forces of President Milosevic will be gone from here, and the strident voice of Belgrade will be silenced. Michael Williams, BBC News, Pristina.
Heralding their arrival up on the ridge where the Serbian snipers and patrols have been in position, we had two bursts of automatic gunfire, and flares were shot into the air. I think that was a little goodbye from the Serbian troops who are watching all this activity down in the valley below them. So at the moment, a keen sense of anticipation. The first of the British troops and armour have arrived here at the border crossing. I think they're communications vehicles, essentially. That's the most important thing about the advance into Kosovo. It's got to be carefully controlled. General Sir Mike Jackson has got to have communications established. He must know exactly what's going on with the deployment. So that's why these British troops are here now. They're essentially to set up a signals base.
We're talking about a total of
more than a dozen British armored personnel carriers and jeeps, and it appears that the staging area is being moved closer to the border. So I look back here now, you can see the armored personnel carriers that are stacked up here at the Blace border crossing. They have pulled up here without any advance notice. They are packed with equipment stacked about 10 to 12 feet high on top of the APC, and they are right now at the border crossing. Also in the air, as they pulled up, we could hear helicopters overhead, something we have not heard here at all. About 40 minutes ago, we also heard gunfire coming from the Yugoslav side of the border, about 500 meters from here. But I can tell you that something is definitely up right now, because these are proper.
And there was no holding them back. Flooding out of the camps, they cheered the advance of NATO. The agony of exile forgotten, their spirits lifted, certain now their long weeks of separation from their homeland and their loved ones would soon be over. Throughout the day, the vanguard of British troops moved up towards the border of Kosovo into the cornfields of Macedonia. They will be the springboard for the advance into Pristina. These are the men who will deploy at first light tomorrow to secure the ridges and bridges above the mountain road that leads to the Kosovar capital. The weeks of training over, the real thing is now only hours away.
We've been here for 3.5 months now, and we're keen to get on. There's a job to do, and we're ready to do it.
Looking forward to clearing the way and making sure everything's sorted out for the refugees to get back.
Led by the British, advanced northwards. As soon as the roads, bridges and tunnels are cleared by combat engineers, they'll cross the border into Kosovo. General Sir Mike Jackson, KFOR's commander, has said his men will face a volatile situation in the first hours and days of the advance. There'll be no way to eliminate all the risks. Last night of despair for 600,000 people sheltering in the hills of the province. NATO at last is coming. David Chater, Sky News, on the Kosovo border.
As we're moving forward towards the southern borders of Kosovo, for a while it looked as if neither Al Gore nor anyone else took the Russian assurances very seriously, and British troops were about to move in. There were reports that they might even be sent to secure Pristina airport to stop Russian troop carriers landing there. But eventually, the situation was diffused.
This evening, British forces are just hours away from entering Kosovo. Troops are finally poised to cross the border after a day of extraordinary drama and confusion. This afternoon, sudden and frenetic activity as Chinook helicopters arrived to pick up hundreds of British paratroopers to race into Kosovo. It was on the orders of NATO commanders, alarmed by the news that the Russians were already heading towards Pristina. For a few hours it seemed as if a potentially calamitous confrontation with Russian forces was about to take place. But just as the paratroopers were about to leave, they were held back. This is fast becoming a military operation bogged down with politics and confusion. This evening, after a day of expectation for these troops, they are back to square one. It now seems likely that the entry into Kosovo will take place as planned at dawn tomorrow morning. Also on the move to the border this afternoon, Britain's 4th Armoured Brigade, including the firepower of the Challenger tank. They too were suddenly told to stop. Their mission is to get to Pristina as quickly as possible to secure the capital. They hope to have the British headquarters set up there by tomorrow evening. The NATO soldiers who have reached the border this evening have been mobbed by Kosovo Albanian refugees, celebrating the imminent liberation of their homeland. Mark Austin, ITN, on the Macedonian-Kosovo border.
Border between Kosovo and Serbia proper, we found the Yugoslav army in full retreat, firing in the air to celebrate their exit from what has been the principal war zone. On display were the dated anti-aircraft weapons which proved so ineffective against
spotted lined up on the runway. They survived in a deep tunnel at one end of the airfield, a bunker NATO attacked repeatedly. Both ends of the tunnel were bombed shut, but 2,000-pound bombs failed to penetrate the thick rock.
It was really a hardened bunker. It's actually dug into the side of a mountain that obviously is made out of granite or something.
As the MiGs took off for safety in the north, their departure was captured by infrared cameras on NATO drones. The runway was never bombed because the Allies knew it would be needed to get the first peacekeepers in. The spy plane images also showed what appeared to be a warehouse, possibly set ablaze by Serb troops. While there was
It is certainly a possibility, and we are expecting NATO troops to come in here to Kukës tomorrow. These are the German troops, around 500 of them, who are going to go from Albania into Kosovo to secure that border area. So it is entirely possible, but we're not yet clear whose plane it was. There's some speculation here it may have been a British plane, but I can't confirm that. So I think we'll just have to wait for some more detail to start coming through.
And yet another report, Caroline, says it might be an aircraft from the United Arab Emirates, who apparently have been delivering aid and using C-130s. This was a makeshift airfield, wasn't it?
Well, that's right. As I said, it has only been built within the last few weeks because people have been needing to bring in food and supplies and water into Kukës, where we have some 30,000 refugees living in camps and another 70,000 in the surrounding area. It is not, if you like, a normal runway. It is compacted earth. It has the markings on it and all of that, but it would be quite a tricky landing for any plane. But I have to say, all the others over the past few weeks have been landing safely there to deliver supplies.
Our night vision camera rolling across this Blatze crossing point is basically you're seeing the first detachment, if you like, the forward detachment of some battalion elements who will set up things like communications, tents, basic elements of setting up a battalion headquarters. And they will begin their task certainly tomorrow. It's not certain whether they'll complete it tomorrow, but that's their aim.
And what do you think the problems are that lie in wait for the troops tomorrow?
Troops were told to stand down. British sources now say NATO will cross into Kosovo tomorrow. Along the route they're taking, their progress is already stirring excitement. Frenzy has filled the roadside by the Stankovic refugee camp. Police didn't even try to hold people back when the fence gave way.
Time has a much different meaning for people here who've been waiting more than 2 months.
Peacekeepers, it's a short holdup on the road to Kosovo. A happy one. It's called gratitude. Richard Roth, CBS News, Stankovic, Macedonia.
A B-52 catches several hundred Serb troops in the open. The payoff of a secret intelligence operation which allowed NATO aircraft to fly missions in support of the Kosovo Liberation Army, even though Allied officials insisted there was no formal coordination with the KLA.
We've indicated before, we don't intend.
Operators worked with the KLA and reported its battle plans to NATO, which tailored its strikes to take advantage of what was happening on the ground. They also gave the KLA video cameras to take into Kosovo to document evidence of war crimes, including this massacre of civilians. The KLA was no match for the Yugoslav army, but when the guerrillas attacked, the Serbs would have to mass their heavy weapons, making lucrative targets for B-52s and B-1s. During the first 2 months of the war, NATO planes destroyed only a small fraction of Serb forces in Kosovo. Once the KLA went on the offensive, and coincidentally the weather cleared, the number of kills skyrocketed.
I'm not sure at this stage how big their presence is. In other words, I don't think that there are enough Russians around for them to then draw back on that, as you suggest, pull them out. What is of course clear is that because they've had to pull troops away from Bosnia, from the Bosnian peacekeeping operation, it's clear that they haven't got enough troops in the region in the way that NATO has built up in Macedonia over the last few months.
While we're talking, Gabriel, I should point out that we now have pictures from Pristina of the Russian peacekeeping troops which have arrived. Well, a few of the Russian peacekeeping troops that have arrived, which we'll keep looking at while we talk. The KLA, everybody's worried about the KLA. How are the KLA likely to read the independent arrival of the Russians? Are the Russians, for example, in danger from the KLA?
Well, there have been various statements made by KLA commanders on the ground saying that they're still sort of considering their options about how to respond and so on. The KLA are clearly very concerned, just as indeed the ordinary, the rest of the population of Kosovo are Albanians. But in theory, there should be no armed Serbian formations of any kind, military, police or paramilitary, left in Kosovo within, well, in 9 days' time when the withdrawal is supposed to have been completed.
But how likely is it considered that some paramilitaries will remain behind? Either idealistic...
that there would be no Russian troops going in until there was a political agreement. Now, we do not know that there has been any type of agreement here in Moscow. The talks between Strobe Talbot, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, and Igor Ivanov were supposed to go until late last night, but as far as we know, there has been no agreement. So this is quite surprising and would seem to contradict what senior Russian officials were saying up until late last night. A very brief statement, and obviously they were quite concerned. He started out by saying, unfortunately, the troops are there and that the reasons are being clarified. He also said that the troops have been ordered to leave immediately. Now, this is the same man who just a few hours ago had assured the United States that Russian troops would not be going into Kosovo unless something had been decided in the discussions that are taking place in Moscow on...
Hundreds of soldiers of the Gurkha Regiment. These are really a legacy of the former British Empire in Asia, recruited in Nepal, in the foothills of the Himalayas. They say themselves that they feel they're particularly suited to this very rugged, very mountainous terrain. That's a terrain that characterizes the border area between Macedonia and Kosovo. So the Gurkhas in convoy with the paratroopers to be moving into Kosovo later on this morning along this main road to Pristina.
They did not have orders to take the town of Pristina and would be pulled out earlier.
I don't know whether we can talk now to our correspondent, David Chater.
Yes, the first wave of helicopters have appeared overhead. They are guarding the main Chinooks, which will be appearing any minute now. As Keith Graves has said, in a few seconds' time, they'll be appearing overhead here. Some of them have got armored vehicles. In fact, down the valley now, I think I can see them, but obviously the operation has started on time. The choppers are circling overhead at the moment, and we'll see the Chinooks. Yes, we can see the Chinooks coming up the valley right now. They'll be with us, I should say, in about 2 minutes' time. I think the cameras picked them up already. These are carrying the contingents of the Parachute Regiment, the 1st Battalion of the Parachute Regiment, and the Gurkhas. Their job to actually land these men on the ridges above the main defile, which the armored columns will then move into 6 miles down the road towards Pristina. That's the first area they're going to secure. The men of the Parachute Regiment, as I say, and the Gurkhas, they'll be landing on the ridges around us very, very soon, deploying to secure the area, and that'll be the signal for the start of the armored column and the columns we have around us now to start moving in across the border of Kosovo. The KFOR commander, General Sir Mike Jackson, said his men will be facing a very volatile situation in the first few hours and days of this operation. The operation is now underway. They cannot eliminate all the risks when they go inside. He said he's going to be very even-handed, but 100 yards away from the actual border crossing with Kosovo, and the men have now started up their trucks. They're beginning to get ready to move in, but first of all, the paratroopers and the Gurkhas will have to deploy on the ridges around me here.
Spectacular pictures, David.
Cross into the border, not cross the border into Kosovo and wait outside. But no, they're quite disappointed to hear that. They're wondering, you know, how that may affect their operation today. Will they immediately go to Pristina as they were hoping that they may?
Now move in.
Right, they want to get in, they want to get on with it. This afternoon they thought they were going in. That was yesterday afternoon. It was just a few hours ago. They were all in the same cornfield, racing minutes away from getting on the helicopter.
Russian troops, the fact that Russian troops got into Pristina first and now have been ordered out. And it was remarkable the way they were saying that it didn't really bother them. That was just political. They've got a job to do. They want to get on with that job. They want to get the refugees back home. And that means that they've got to concentrate on that 6 miles down the border across.
To impose some kind of peace and stability on Kosovo to allow those refugees back into their homes.
About a half a mile back. The ridge that I was talking about, where the Serbian positions have been, we can now see NATO helicopters overhead. Perhaps they're about to deploy their troops up in those hills. They overlook the main road through to the border. Those Serbian soldiers have been looking down on us for the last week or so, watching the slow build-up of NATO troops. Well, now those NATO helicopters are deploying across those ridges to secure those ridges and to secure the environment for the column down here below us. Carrying their loads, armored cars and weapons, moving in right over our heads right now across the valley, and in about, I should say in about 15 seconds, they'll be in the airspace of Kosovo. Let's just watch them for a while. That's a great sight. The operation is now well under.
It's the Falklands War in 1982 into such an environment, a historic moment. We're also seeing them firing off flares to do away with any missiles that may be heat-seeking missiles that may be coming towards them. We're also seeing just to the left of us, as the smoke clears, Apache helicopters hovering in the hills and the hilltops above us, providing ground support to these Chinook helicopters, taking the airborne 5th British paratroopers in. They're coming in at all angles overhead to the left-hand valley and bank leading into Kosovo and securing all areas of the high spots. The Apache, the Chinook helicopters we can see carrying beneath them the equipment that the British paratroopers will need once they disembark from their helicopters to secure the high routes and the high points in the valleys and the hills of this very mountainous area right along the border area into Kosovo. It's very dramatic. The skies are filling with not only Chinook helicopters bearing the troops and some of their vehicles that they're going to need, but the fearsome Apache helicopters who are providing ground support, as I say, hovering just over in another area to my right, making sure that they go in to where those dangers are.
When these Chinook helicopters, the massive 2 rotor-bladed helicopters, finally alight, will...
Is that the, well, is that the spearhead armor? As I was saying, the sapper...
9 or 10 weeks ago, the hundreds of thousands of dispossessed from Kosovo were pouring over every single day. We are now seeing for the first time NATO forces going the other way, back into Kosovo, with the strict aim that these same refugees still in...
Down on this armored column. You're breaking up entirely now.
Well, this is the first troops move along the main route. Behind me here, Blatce, across the border, across the Macedonian side and into Kosovo.
Raggy, of course, this isn't the only point, in theory, along the border of Kosovo.
And this column behind me is beginning to move. The first ones have already moved off across the border, and the rest are now following. So this operation is underway. Slowly, the trucks are moving forward. They're sappers, they're engineers, they're signalmen.
Said they will greet NATO as allies and as conquering allies, but they're going to meet them not with empty arms. They're going to meet NATO troops with their guns in their hands. That may be another problem.
Of course, NATO has been to some degree covertly working with the KLA in the lead up to this movement of KFOR into Kosovo. Will it be difficult for NATO to change that relationship now to one where NATO is
deployed on the ridges above this road? That's why the orders here have been given for everybody to move in as fast as possible. And I hope you can still hear me. We've got armoured tracked vehicles, APCs, everything moving in towards Kosovo. The whole column.
Another Chinook coming in, carrying we know not what.
Well, actually,
earlier. Sorry, David.
Ready to drop onto the higher ground along there and secure that. They don't seem to be too...
Also, a great deal of concern about the possibility of attacks from pockets of Serb resistance inside Kosovo, also indeed from fighters of the Kosovo Liberation Army. It's a key mandate of the NATO force in Kosovo to disarm rebels of the KLA, to demilitarize the whole province, and NATO officials have expressed their concern.
Left by the Serbs following their withdrawal. British soldiers came across more than 30 Serb military and